Hello, hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining today. A
Well,
few
thanks,
more
Matt.
people filtering in. Pleasure. So, just so that you're all aware, this is being live streamed to Facebook, and you, with that information, can share as much or as little as you like. I am going to dive right in because there's so much to talk about in this hour that we have together. So, let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Yeah, awesome. Okay, great. Let me see. So you are here for the Organic Masculine. My name is Matt Sturm, and it's a pleasure to be having a conversation around masculinity and what it could mean for us culturally and individually today. We're going to have some opportunities to share together over the course of this call. So for starters, I would love it if you would just type into the chat, what about masculinity drew you here today? What is it about this topic? Why is it relevant for you? Let's take a moment. So the first comment is integrity. Okay, so that is a topic that shows up a lot in men's work, integrity. Passion about divine union. Great. I want to say, as I have been having more and more conversations around the organic masculine, I have been blown away by the women who have shown up to be in these conversations. And really, my hat is off to all of the women who engage in men's work and want to be part of creating healthy masculinity. It's beautiful to me. Someone is here, Rebecca is here out of curiosity about similarities and differences in men's work compared with women's work. Yeah, great. Similarities and differences, totally. And increasing capacitance. Cool. So there's a lot of different aspects of masculinity, and there are different entry points in. And I just want to start by recognizing that you all came here for your own reasons. And we're going to be having a conversation today. And what I hope to do is connect up where I'm at in the conversation around with masculinity to where you're at so that it's relevant and meaningful for you. One more. Interested in the constraints placed on masculinity by cultural and social norms and different ways that masculinity can look like. Beautiful. At the Towards the end, maybe in the last 15, 20 minutes of this session, we're going to look at that exactly. So that's coming your way. Next question. Okay. So we're here to talk about masculinity. I'm just going to start by throwing it open to you all. What is masculinity? Mm-hmm. Great. So structure and form, action. Yang archetype. Great. Qualities that we associate with being a man. Yes. Yep. I like that. Great. At the other end of the spectrum from femininity. Great. Witness consciousness. Yes. Okay, awesome. Thank you for these thoughts. If there's more, just feel free to type them in. So, one of the places that I want to shift the conversation around masculinity and gender more broadly is when we talk about what is masculinity or what is the feminine. Oftentimes we hear there's a series of traits like witness consciousness, structure and form, yang. So the traits, I would say they're all contextually true. In a given context, in a given situation, witness consciousness can absolutely be the expression of the masculine. But where I kind of where I have gotten stuck in the conversation is if I'm not using witness consciousness as my definition for the masculine, then suddenly I'm not on board with you anymore. And we start missing each other. And if I say, I'm just going to pick on witness consciousness here, if I say that that is the definition of masculinity, then I'm subtly discounting the feminine or other genders from holding witness consciousness from that trait. And can the feminine have presence? Absolutely. Is the masculine only witness consciousness, or can masculinity be also be involved in that which is witnessed? And, structure and form and action, this is a perfect example, can also be masculine, and they're on the other side of that polarity. So for me, there are no universal masculine traits because every time we say this is what it is, it's so easy to find a counterexample. So I want to take the conversation beyond the traits into, well, you'll see. But this is a great starting point. So thank you for all of those. I think I have one more question. Oh, this is such a good one. Is gender only a social construct? You don't have to type this into the chat. You can if you want. But so in our dialogue collectively, there's this idea that gender is socially constructed, meaning we learn it as young people. It's imprinted on us as a series of values and behaviors and identities. And that there is no core, there is no inherent masculine or feminine. It's only something that exists because we all believe it exists. We all act like it does. And I spent decades of my life in the gender is only a social construct camp. It's a totally valid place, and I have respect for folks who are there. I'm coming on talking about the organic masculine. If we thought that gender was only a social construct, that it's only something that we kind of culturally created together, and then we look at all of the harm and issues with men and masculinity in the world, then it would be logical to conclude that we need to get past gender. There's nothing inherent about it. We're all just making it up as we go. What we have made up is really dysfunctional. It's not working. So let's transcend beyond the masculine. If, however, you believe that there is a deeper essence to masculinity, that there is something more inherent than just a series of cultural, language, and relational things that humans do with each other. If there's something deeper than that, then that means we're going to have to work with masculinity instead of trying to get beyond masculinity. And that's an important distinction. It's an important place that I want us to all level set at. And I'm going to give you, I think, next, the broader context of how I understand masculinity. So let's just take a breath together with that.
Cool.
Here we go. As we dive in, I want to say I'm sharing as someone who has thought deeply about masculinity. I don't think I have all of the answers or the only answer. I'm coming on to share today from the place of let's have this conversation together. Let's explore it together and let's find what works together because of all of the harm that masculinity is causing in the world today and the ways that masculinity is interrelated with our crises, social oppression, things like that. Let's take the time to invest in this topic because it's important, because this is where we can really leverage change. So, for starters, what I want you to do is close your eyes, take another breath, and as you start to bring your awareness inside, just feel into your heart space right now. And as you feel into your heart, I want you to ask your heart, when was a time, show me a time that I experienced masculinity directly? And there may be a memory, there may be an occasion, there may be qualities about it that show up. Whatever shows up, just trust that. Even if nothing is showing up, that's totally okay. So, what we find in our hearts, either as an
But I
identity,
can't go there.
here's
You've been talking the whole time.
hmm, great. Thank you for sharing that. So, let's just take a few more breaths and feel into it. And this may be part of a longer exploration, but we're going to move on from here. If you found something, if you were able to find, oh, that feels like masculinity, either as an identity or in relation with someone else, just give me a thumbs up. Some people found something. Oh, yeah, great. So my position is that this is our starting point, and all other perspectives here are footnotes to this statement. So what your heart recognizes as the masculine, that's what matters. That's the true masculine. And that some of us may be lost. Some of us may have lost connection with the masculine, or we may have so much wounding in the way that we can't really see it. But generally, our heart shows us that there is something here to masculinity. And that's my basis. That's, I think, should be our basis. And when we're connected to that, then we have our own authentic relationship that we get to have this conversation from. So somebody says, I'm not convinced that what I recognize as the masculine is truly masculinity or solely masculinity. Beautiful comment. That skepticism is going to take you so far, so stick with it. And don't try to, because I'm inviting it, say, oh, this is definitely it. Stay in that unknown space and let it arise or not arise as you find it. So here's my framework. In order to understand masculinity, we have to broaden our perspective to include these layers of psycho-spiritual experience. These are places where our consciousness can expand into. And I'm going to go from the bottom up. So the gross, meaning the densest layer, is our physical bodies and physical form, so manifestation. A step up in etheric from there is the subtle realm, and that's where we experience individual and collective identity and expression from. This is the subtle energetic realm. So life force is here, but thought forms are also here. If we go up another level, we have the causal realm, and that's where the archetypes and patterns of meaning live. So archetypes, right? Started with Carl Jung. He was the first to really explain what this phenomenon is. When we look across cultures, the same images, the same symbols, the same deities keep showing up again and again and again. And when we look at dreams that people have, those symbols also show up there. Even if the people are not connected to the same culture, even if they're from different eras of human history, these same symbols keep showing up again and again. And so Carl Jung said, well, there must be some universal repository that we're all able to tap into. He called it the collective unconscious. And these symbols are archetypes. They are universal patterns of meaning that influence all of us. Universal meaning we all have access to them. So the archetypes are in the causal layer. And then if we go up one last step, the high causal layer holds the primal polarities, the highest differentiations of spirit. So if we have unity consciousness at the top, where we split from unity into polarity, that's the high causal realm. So light and dark, positive and negative, um, masculine and feminine. I actually hold three primal differentiations for gender, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But so my perception is that gender constellates through all these realms, through our physical bodies, through our identities and expressions, through the archetypes, and then through the primal differentiations of spirit. And here's what that looks like. So on the left, we have the same list, gross, subtle, causal, high causal. And then our three columns here, we have the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and the divine androgen. As I said, I actually don't subscribe to there's just two genders. I subscribe to there are many, many gender expressions, but there are three kind of primary archetypal energies. So from the bottom, gross level, physical level, we have our biological forms, which includes our physiology, our genes, our hormones, and we split that into male, female, hermaphroditic, and transsexual. There's not bright lines to say this is male and this is not male. Like if you have two testicles, but not, or if you have one testicle, but not two testicles, are you still a male or not? So there's fuzziness around what these definitions are, but there's a sense of, okay, male and female come together to reproduce, sperm meets egg. At the subtle level, we step up a level and we get into gender. So our gender is our identity, it's our expression, and it can be tied to our physiology, but it's not necessarily so. So we have masculine genders, feminine genders, and then queer, trans, and third genders. And I say genders here because there's not just one masculine gender. There's macho masculinity. There's metrosexual masculinity. There's cowboy masculinity. There's all these different subcontexts of what masculine means, and it's culturally dependent. So our little subcultures have our own agreed upon definitions, which are totally valid, and there's many of them. There's not just one. Same for the feminine, and then queer, trans, and third gender. That's like the whole rainbow, right? When we take another step up into the causal level, we get the masculine archetypes, the feminine archetypes, and the androgynous archetypes. So masculine archetypes, the wild man, the king, feminine archetypes, the mother, the maiden, the crone, right? These are myths, which lay cultural specific myths, which lay on top of the universal archetypes. And there are these patterns of meaning. They're basically personalities that humanity taps into and they influence us. Androgynous archetypes. So, an example from Greek mythology, Hermes and Aphrodite in one story come together and they have a baby. And that baby is both sexes, and it's called hermaphrodite. Hermes plus Aphrodite, hermaphrodite. And that's where the word hermaphrodite comes from. In Indian mythology, um, artist Narivara, Arda Naris Vara, Vengat, correct me if I got that wrong, is the deity that is both fully male and fully female. When we look across cultures, there are many examples of androgynous deities. And so my position here is that that's an archetype. That's one of the primal differentiations of spirit. I will not be sharing images of the divine androgen in this presentation. Good question, Vengat. Oops. So I'm going to pause here because this is actually quite a bit of information that I just kind of laid out. And I want to see if there are questions or comments here. The way that I talk about gender and the way that I talk about the masculine through these realms is not part of the mainstream. It's part of what I'm bringing in. So this is going to be new. Cool. If
Can
there
I
are
ask a question
questions,
quick?
yeah, please.
Yeah. So we're talking about only the human sexual diversification, but in the overall scheme of consciousness, it's
Mhm.
for all beings. So in that way, how does it work?
So above the high causal realm is unity consciousness, right? So my framework, my worldview for this is non-dual. We all come from one source. But that undifferentiated source then diversifies into the full range of existence that we get to experience and enjoy. And this is how human sexual diversification happens through these layers and levels. It percolates through. Does that answer your question? Yeah, great. So it doesn't seem gender has anything to do with masculinity, but is it a way of being? Right. So gender is a type, or sorry, masculinity is a type of gender at the subtle realm. Masculinity is also a type of archetype at the causal realm. And masculinity, or rather maleness, is a type of human physiology at the gross realm. It's one of the subsets. So the larger word for what I call the masculine is a morphic field. And that's going to be the next slide. Morphic field is a term that was coined by biologist Rupert Sheldrake to describe these universal patterns of meaning that seem to be handed down through generations of organisms. He calls them the habits of consciousness or the habits of the cosmos. Okay, so what is masculinity? Masculinity is experienced through the heart's natural and innate recognition of the masculine. We know it when we see it. That was our first exercise. It's one member of a primal trinity of sexual diversification, together with the feminine and the androgen. He contextually defines himself through polarity with the feminine. So, in one context, witness consciousness, Shiva, masculine, Shakti, form, feminine, contextually defines themselves through polarity. Okay, great. That's a totally valid polarity that exists throughout the universe that people can tap into. In another context, the masculine is form and structure, the feminine is flow. The feminine is the movement of flow, right? So that's a totally different polarity that would seem to be at odds with this other polarity, right? So in a given context, those polarities are true. And when you're experiencing that, it's true for you. And great, right on. But there's not a universal trait. There's not a universal series of traits. They know each other through polarity. So here we go about the morphic field. The morphic field is a primal groove in consciousness, and it spans through the levels of archetype, gender, and sex. And so masculinity is one of these morphic fields. In addition to spanning the whole range, it's continually evolving. It's constantly growing and changing. So the way that we're talking about masculinity today is different than the conversation we were having 10 years ago, is different than the conversation we were having 20 years ago or 100 years ago, right? masculinity is evolving. It evolves through humanity, it evolves through our cultures, through generations, and through each of us as individuals. And so really, masculinity, it's a singular morphic field, but also its expression constellates uniquely within each individual. So there's an unbounded number of expressions of masculinity, but we each can kind of feel it and get it. Oh, that's it. The same is true of the feminine. It's harder generally to see and feel the androgen. The androgen has this trickster quality. Now you see me, now you don't. Or is that really it? That's a whole other workshop. But so this is my definition for what is masculinity. Great. Let's take a breath together. Okay, moving right along. Oh, yeah. Here is the archetypal framework that I use to kind of visualize what it is. So, archetypal means symbolic. The masculine tends to be the above or the apex, the feminine tends to be the below or the void. And through that polarity, they define themselves, they know each other. But I could also say that the masculine is at one extreme, the left extreme or the right extreme, and the feminine's at the other extreme. Above and below are just kind of where our myths and stories have tended to place these energies. If you could imagine that there's two cones meeting each other, the circumference of where those cones meet out on the edge, that's where the androgen lives. So the androgen is all of the blended, othered, not fully one, not fully the other, third gender, playful gender expressions. And it occupies this whole circle. There's a full range of expression of the androgen. Archetypally, we find that through the circumference or the horizon. So that's where the myths and stories access the androgen. All of these are in relationship to our center. The center is where we find unity. So for people who are visual like me, something like this helps me just place, okay, this is it. This is what we're talking about. Now, the organic masculine. So this is a term that I coined. I published a book in May called The Organic Masculine. My position is that the core of masculinity is life affirming and sacred. It's an essential element of the flourishing of the human life cycle. So if we hold that all parts of me are sacred, and if we hold that all of life is sacred, then we have to include masculinity in that. Masculinity is also sacred. It may be distorted or wounded or wounding in our culture right now, but my position is that there is a core, a deeper layer of masculinity that we can find, which affirms life.
Oh,
Individuals and cultures mature through the masculine life cycle via rites of passage and initiation. So when we bring in the archetypal layer of what is masculinity, and we'll talk about initiation, I think, next. So there will be more on this. The way that indigenous cultures or cultures with rites of passage still intact move through the life cycle is in the process of initiation. And that's how they go from immature expressions of masculinity to more mature expressions of masculinity. And when we have the archetypal understanding of masculinity, then we can start to tap back into initiation as a tool that we can use. So one of the ways to understand our culture today is that we have lost rites of passage as we become modern and industrialized. We let go of the rites of passage. And because we no longer have those, we're stuck in immature, adolescent expression of masculinity collectively. We have not initiated into a more expansive, more life affirming version. So it's one way to understand the problem that we have with masculinity today. When maturation stalls, the masculine becomes distorted, wounded, and oppressive. Stalled life cycles naturally move towards death and then eventual renewal. That's how life works. So collectively, our masculine expression, in the culture today is kind of stalled. We're stuck. It's distorted, it's wounded, it's oppressive, and our culture is moving towards death through ecosystem deconstruction and all the various crises in the world. Um, that's one direction that our culture is going, in part because it needs to renew. So, in its healthy and mature state, masculinity is by his nature life affirming. And this is what I call the organic masculine. I am going to put some folks on mute just for the sake of the background noise. Let's see. Oh. And I want to see, actually, I also want to open it up for questions here. Are there any questions so far? What do I mean by life affirming? Okay, do you want to ask this, Rebecca? Go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah, sure. I actually had two questions. The
sure.
one that's a little bit higher up in the chat. You were talking about how rites of passage have been eliminated, or we don't have the rites of passage that we had traditionally. But are there other things that those may have been replaced with? Like, is there anything that you can see in today's culture that you could consider a rite of passage?
Yes, great question. Okay, so the two questions. The first one is, what do I mean by life affirming, right? One of my favorite, so I have two favorite quotes on this topic. One is by Janine Benyus, who's an author. She says, life creates the conditions that are conducive to life. When we are in our heart's recognition of masculinity and we are promoting life, meaning fertility or protection or support, or even moving through the cycles of death in a healthy way, that is it. And it's kind of like I know it when I see it, when life flourishes. So the other quote that I love here is by Robin Wall Kimmerer, another author, and she says, all flourishing is mutual. That's indigenous wisdom from her Native American nation. All flourishing is mutual. So when we are flourishing together, that's life affirming. Masculinity is included in that. Your other question about rites of passage today. So, like graduating from high school is a rite of passage, right? Um, Having sex for the first time or having a child, childbirth is often a rite of passage. There are these rites of passage that exist, but in the ways that our culture holds them, they have lost the initiatory core. So, what I mean by that is when we graduate from high school, it's a rite of passage. We finished something and we move on to a different phase of life. But what doesn't happen there is we don't go into a container, a ritual container or a sacred space where the old identity is stripped away, it dies, and then we are reborn into a new identity with new empowerments and new responsibilities. And then we're brought back out into the world as an adult. So we have the vestiges. I grew up Catholic. I went through confirmation. Confirmation is meant to be that demarcation from the adolescent into the adult. But I didn't go through the process of stripping away the old identity and taking on a new identity in the initiatory ritual structure. That's what we're missing. Okay. Katya.
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. I have a comment more than a question.
Please,
I
yes.
noticed in your graphic that you had the feminine associated with the void. And that surprised me because the way I understand void is emptiness, which I have known to be associated rather with masculine, while the feminine associated with fullness. So I
Yes. Oh, love it.
was
Great.
curious about that.
Yep, absolutely. So 100% yes, you are, and this is why I keep giving the caveat about the traits and the labels. So in one context, we could say the feminine is the void. In another context, we could say the feminine is fullness. And they are
Mm,
both 100% true in that given context. And thank you so much for bringing that in. Absolutely.
yeah.
Hmm.
So that would be another one of those examples where, in a certain context, something very contradictory can be
Yes.
true in both cases.
Yes. So
Yeah.
in psychology, the word that they give for the archetypes is overdetermined. Overdetermined means that more than one interpretation can simultaneously be true.
Mm,
Yep,
yeah.
great. Vengat, yes.
So we were talking about, doing rites of passage and moving from one identity to another identity. What I personally feel is not about moving and taking some identity. It's basically dropping the veil that I'm actually a child. I'm actually this. So it's dropping the veil and going more towards the divine part of it.
Yes, beautiful. Absolutely. The another way to look at this is the sovereign center of the self changes, meaning where I make my decisions from and where I know myself from changes. So we all have inner children. When we moved from child to adult, we did not get rid of our inner children forever. But what happened is the child is now part of our inner council, and the adult is the sovereign center. Yeah, great. Okay. Awesome questions. I'm going to keep moving here. And Vengat, you can put your hand down if you like. All right. So we have now posited the potential existence of the organic masculine. How do we get there? One of the challenges that I have in describing the organic masculine is people want a picture. What is it? What does it look like? And then we have to keep coming back to the experience that you are having. That's where we begin from. One of the challenges that we have is that we've been given these pictures from society. And those roles, those gender roles, are a little distorted. And where we want to get to is the place of authentic ownership of this is my masculine or feminine or androgen outside of the pictures that society gives us. So if I were to stand here and say, here's the new picture of the organic masculine, it's just repeating the what society has already been doing, which is saying, here's your masculine script, live by this now. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to start with our authentic self in recognition of masculinity. So the pathways to access the organic masculine, there are two of them. One is maturation. And we do that through initiation through the archetypes. And I'll say more about that on the next slide. There is a process to mature from younger, less empowered to more mature, more empowered with greater responsibility archetypes. And these archetypes are gendered. Traditionally, they are gendered. This is why men's work and women's work and gender work, for me, holds a special role out of all the social constructs. So race, class, able-bodiedness, all of these other social constructs and group identities that we hold do not have this same archetypal initiation pathway that gender does. So I'll say more about that on the next slide, but the other pathway that I want to touch on here is development, and we develop via advancement through paradigms. So, um, we recognize that humans and society move through kind of universal levels of development cognitively, emotionally, relationally, psychospiritually, sexually. There are these different layers. And when you start to compare these models, there are paradigms that emerge. There are these universal levels that we all seem to move through. And the culture colors them. They look different for different cultures, but they're universal deep features. So I'm going to share these next. Those are the two things that I want to talk about next. Everyone will have their own version of authentic masculinity. 100% yes. And it's complicated because it's so relational. Who I am with you is also how we discover and define masculinity. And who we as a collective are together also creates its own definitions for masculinity. But where we want to move towards is each of us finding our own authentic version and then sharing that relationally. And then what will happen is that there's more of an emergent experience of the masculine and the feminine, as opposed to men need to be the providers and women need to be the caretakers, nurturers, right? Like that's kind of a top-down picture that society gives to us. Okay, so let's look more on initiation through the archetypes. The process of initiation has, for very simple purposes, 3 steps. We start at home, our regular, normal reality. There is a call. We feel called to go on an adventure. This is also known as the hero's journey. We answer the call. We step into the unknown and we enter the ordeal. The ordeal could be climbing a mountain peak, getting lost in a labyrinth, or descending to the pits of hell, right? Above, circumference, below. In the ordeal, the old us is stripped away. We become reduced to very humble humans in what's called a secure symbolizing field, a vast spiritual realm where we're very, very tiny. In that realm, we enter the process of initiation where the old us dies, symbolically dies, and a new us is reborn. And then that new us exits the ordeal and returns back home. Phase 3 is the return. We integrate back into the regular, ordinary world. Okay. That's the process of initiation. It's used across many, many different cultures. It's been studied by a lot of anthropologists and religious theorists. And yeah, so there's strong documentation for the universal nature of this process. It's something that humans do. Here are some masculine archetypes: golden boy, hero, the man, the elder. Each one advances to a greater station, but includes as a subpart the archetype that came before. And so we can use initiation to go from the boy to the hero. We can use initiation to go from the hero to the man. We can use initiation to go from the man to the elder. And when we look at more tribal, traditional cultures that have their rites of passage intact, we find these. So the rite of passage from the golden boy to the hero is called unleashing the wild man. The rite of passage from the hero to the man is called the willing sacrifice. And the rite of passage from the man to the elder is called succession. I go into more of those in my book. Actually, all of this, I go into a lot more detail in the book, but just high level. This is one of the ways that we can access the organic masculine. Most of us in our culture are stuck in the hero level. The hero wants to achieve, he wants to find personal glory, he wants to be recognized by his peers. There's a developmentally appropriate phase, namely adolescence, where this matters. We want to figure out how to be ourselves, how to get our needs met, how to do our profession in the world. Because we have so many superhero movies, We live in a culture that enforces this archetype, right? And it's not wrong, but it's not adult. It's not the mature adult. And what separates the hero from the man or the heroine from the woman is the capacity to sacrifice for something bigger than my individual egoic self, the willing sacrifice. That's the rite of passage that we most need in our culture today, that we're most lacking. The other way, the other pathway to access the organic masculine is through paradigms. So human consciousness advances through these paradigms. Mythic, mental, plural, integral are some of them. There are more. For this work, I am drawing on Ken Wilber's integral theory mostly. But there are also psychological, anthropological, spiritual, many cognitive, many different models that show we move through these kind of universal levels. And the levels are not continuous, they're like buckets. We're in one bucket and then we jump to another bucket. It's called the paradigm shift. So at one phase of life, I see the world mythically, and what I care about is belonging. So we are the chosen people. I'm part of that tribe of chosen people, and we have our one truth, which is handed to us from some source on high, some great authority. That's a paradigm that actually a lot of the world understands itself through today. There's another paradigm, the mental modern paradigm, which is focused on achievement. And in this paradigm, what is logical and rationally true is what's real. And it's only what can be tested by the scientific method that matters. And we want to use science and business to build great things in the world. That's achievement. That's a different paradigm from the mythic paradigm. The next paradigm, and this is kind of the edge of our culture today, is the plural postmodern paradigm, and it's focused on sensitivity. I become more sensitive to my internal states and emotions, and I become more sensitive to other people and other groups. I want everything to be fair. I want non-centered, marginalized voices to be heard. I want to make space for everybody to be included in the human wheel of existence, plural postmodern. There is another paradigm which is on the horizon, starting to come into our collective consciousness, and that's called integral. The core value at integral is self-actualization. I am finding the wholeness of my centered self, and I want my whole self to be everything it can possibly be, to self-actualize. In addition, I want everyone around me to be supported to get their needs met so that they can self-actualize as well. It's a very brief nugget of the integral paradigm. So let's take a little look. So I want to very briefly go through these four again around masculinity, what these pictures of masculinity look like. Mythic traditional masculine, there's lots of myths of men, but this is the myth of Atlas. So Atlas is a Greek figure. He was a deity, and his job was to hold the sky and the heavens on his shoulders with his strength by himself. So the strong man who's on his own, yeah, I got it. I can carry this, I can lift it, I can do it all. Mythic traditional masculinity. Below Atlas are his daughters, and they're here sleeping at his feet. So another aspect of this type of masculinity is as a protector. The masculine is here to protect the feminine from a dangerous, uncertain world. So this is a picture. It's a totally fine picture. There's nothing wrong with it. And this picture has fed into systems of social power in our world to create dominator hierarchies and harm, basically. Ways that men sit at the top, they hold the authority of the social pyramid because we're the strong ones, and we're here to fight, rule, and provide. So there is a healthy, developmentally appropriate phase of this type of masculinity. This is the one that is mostly out of balance in our world today. that we would hope to support people to grow to the next level, to grow beyond. Mental modern masculine is a very different picture of who men are and what they represent. We are here to discover, to explore, to research, to build, to create great things, and to categorize everything that we possibly can to bring human knowledge to the horizons of our world and to understand mostly through science and the intellect. So this is a different picture. There are ways that this is developmentally appropriate and healthy in our world, and then there are ways, namely capitalism, that this has gotten out of balance, right? The next picture, plural postmodern masculine. Remember, the core trait here is sensitivity. So here's a guy with facial cream on. This is known as the sensitive new age guy. And he is in touch with his emotions. He's done a bunch of therapy. He's probably into environmental justice, social justice, talking about things like masculinity, things like that, right? Yeah. And it's kind of funny. But one of the issues with the plural postmodern version of masculinity is that we're able to now look back at these other two versions and see like these guys are causing a lot of harm. And it seems like masculinity is a problem. And the plural postmodern paradigm views gender as a social construct. If you look at the academic research, that's all plural postmodern. Gender is a social construct. So we're trying to break apart, to deconstruct the masculine. And where we are culturally today, particularly at this paradigm, is we don't have a vision for what a strong, life-affirming masculinity can look like. We want men to be soft, the soft man, the sensitive guy. But it's not a compelling image, probably for most of us. It's not something that we rally behind, that we can really say, hey, to like the cowboys and the scientists in the prior paradigm, come be this guy. This is our like idealized picture of where we want to get to, right? And so the identity crisis that masculinity is having today is happening here. We recognize that masculinity is causing harm, that men holding power are a lot of the problem. And so we say, don't be that. And we throw out masculinity along with that. Okay, I'm going to take a question here. Patrick, yes. Okay. Patrick, you can come off mute and ask your question if you have a question.
That was a mistake, Matt. Sorry about that. That was a mistake, Matt. Excuse me.
No worries. Okay, good. I want to keep moving right along because we got 6 minutes to go and I want to save some time for discussion here at the end. So last paradigm, integral masculinity. We don't yet have a picture for this in our culture. It is at the cutting edge of where we are getting to. But integral masculinity, as I said, sources in wholeness. It has a broader picture of reality, which includes the realms that I shared, so gross, subtle, causal, non-dual, or source. And he cares about evolution. So we want everybody to develop through these series of paradigms. The integral masculinity is one that supports that growth and development process. We all find this in ourselves when we get to this level of development. So I talk a lot more about this in my book. And next week I have a reading group starting. We're going to go through the book together. We're going to read it. We're going to do the exercises in the book, and we're all going to discuss it together. So I gave a vast amount of information here pretty quickly at a very high level. Not enough to properly do it justice, but hopefully enough to spark, oh, yeah, that feels interesting. That feels true. And so that was my main intention here, is to tee up the conversation, really. It's to open the door and say, here's what's possible in the conversation around gender. And what I want to do is be in that conversation together with other folks who get this and are excited about it. So that's my presentation. I'm going to open it up here for questions or comments. And I also just want to say thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this with me today.
Hello, Matt, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Julian. I unfortunately joined a little bit late, but my question is, as you were writing the book about organic masculine, the organic masculine, um, was all kind of the communities taken into account? When I say community, I'm talking about the cultural environment, like from the definition you gave at the end, like when you show the cowboy, the astronaut. I'm from Africa, and then
Mhm.
there's a different approach that is highly similar to what you were sharing. We could have
Mhm.
changed with a different image. So, do you take that in consideration? I mean, those cultures like Middle East, Africa, or Asia, in their approach to define, or I mean, how to find
Yeah,
a, yeah, that's kind of my question.
beautiful. Great question. What part of Africa are you from?
Oh, I'm from Central Africa, Sub-Saharan
Central.
Africa. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Sub-Saharan Africa.
I've been to Ghana and Togo and Benin.
Oh, nice.
Where are you from exactly?
Cameroon.
Uh-huh, Cameroon. Okay, got it.
Yeah, next to
So,
Nigeria. Yeah.
mhm, just south, yeah. So it's a great question. I gave the American cultural pictures or Western cultural pictures at the end of this presentation here. The specifics of, I'm going to scroll back a little bit here if I can, like this guy, that's basically a white guy. These guys are white guys. That's a white guy. So these are culture specific. However, the deep features are similar across Africa and the Middle East. So there is a mythic traditional masculinity which cares about creating safety and belonging. There is a achievement focused masculine who centers in the intellect and rational ways of knowing. And there is a more sensitive, inclusive version of masculinity. And these types of masculinity, even though they look different, the deep features are present across the whole globe as far as we can tell. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, mostly when you talk about the mythic masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to identify myself, but at the same time, the postmodern masculinity, even if I talk about myself, I see myself with a mask to make sure I don't have anything on
Yeah,
my face at the same time. But also I remain the provider in the sense of my interaction with the feminine or with the women. I
totally.
remain the provider and I do not tolerate kind of like I would say in relationship, if in a relationship with women, like any other like masculine energy into that realm of any relationship with women, even being my woman or just being friends, is not something we I would not kind of organically tolerate or accept. I will
Sure.
intellectually accept it, but
Yeah,
so
great. Thank you for sharing that. And what I take out of that is that we can tap into these different expressions of masculinity in different situations. And so the opportunity when we define the different buckets that are here is then to see where am I in this one? Where am I in this bucket? And then how can I support myself to start to move towards the more holistic, more expansive versions of masculinity? And that's the process. That's development through the paradigms. Great question. Any other questions out here? We're at time, so if you need to hop off, go ahead. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm gonna stop my share here and just say thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to get to share this. It's something obviously that I'm really passionate about, and I appreciate other people willing to show up and have this conversation too. Yeah. Please feel free to stay connected with me. If you have other comments or other questions, you can find me on Facebook. My website is livingcosmos.com. Yeah, check out the book. And if you want to be part of the reading group, that starts at this time next week. And that'll be a weekly group to discuss the material in the book in much more detail. So with that, blessings on the rest of your day, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Okay, friends.